So hi everyone. It's an honor to be here today to receive this award and then to be sort of associated with all the amazing people that are getting this award today. I'm going to get right to it. There's 2 points that I sort of want to make in the short time that I have, and it's really directed to I don't know where the camera's at, but directed to the students and the young alumni who might be watching this later. And one is that you should really find what drives you and let it guide your path. And the other is biomedical research is really an exciting and diverse field. And for those who are going into medicine, I would encourage considering a career in research. So I love quotes, and Muhammad Ali is an idol of mine. This is a quote from George Foreman, his boxing rival, about Muhammad Ali. And he's known as this wonderful, amazing, world-class boxer, but was also known for his role in the civil rights movement. And what's said about him is that he found something to fight for other than money and championship belts. And when that person finds something like that, you can't hardly beat them. And I feel like that sort of goes with my journey. So I can't talk about my path unless I talk about my heritage. And so here is, I'm a proud son of immigrants. I was born in Del Rio, Texas, which is a small town on the Texas-Mexico border on the Texas side. My great-grandfather immigrated from Mexico when he was 16 years old on a work visa, and he was a migrant worker and worked picking potatoes and cotton until he saved up enough money to actually buy a machine to shear sheep with. So my grandfather actually used that machine and did that for work until he saved up enough money to buy some trucks to transport hay to feedlots in Texas. And then my dad, who's here today, started out as a truck driver and then eventually became a small business owner, owning his own truck driving school where he actually teaches students how to drive trucks. But I wouldn't be here today unless it was for my younger sister, Rosalind. And this goes back to that quote that I mentioned earlier, having something to fight for. When I was a freshman in high school, my younger sister, Rosalind, who was 6 years old at the time, was diagnosed with a deadly brain tumor called a craniopharyngioma. So she needed 2 neurosurgeries, and the second of which actually left her with no functioning pituitary gland, which is a gland in your body that's required to make endocrine hormones. And so without taking medication on a daily basis, she wouldn't be with us today. So at that moment, that was sort of my inspiration for going into medicine. And as I sort of studied, came to Notre Dame, I realized how important it was to actually have researchers to sort of contribute to our knowledge base so that cases like Rosalind, she could stay alive. It would not have been possible for her to be alive with us today if it weren't for researchers who understood that those hormones were vital to living. And I'm happy to report that she actually is a certified teacher in Texas and is working on her master's in education today. So this is me here with my dad during residency. So graduated from high school in Del Rio, where my parents graduated from high school, class of 2008. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2012 with majors in biochem and philosophy, proud resident of Knott Hall. And then I was in Chicago for 7 years where I did medical school at the University of Chicago and then stayed there for residency. And then went over to Harvard Medical School after that in 2019 to start my first of 2 fellowships in pulmonary and critical care medicine. So I'm a lung specialist and I'm an ICU doctor. I manage patients who are critically ill. Next year, I'll begin my second fellowship in lung transplantation, which will sort of be the mainstay of my career. I'm also a postdoctoral research fellow in transplant immunology, so I focus on studying how the immune system works in human disease at the Center for Transplantation Sciences at MGH. So moving on to the second part, which is that biomedical research is really cool, and there's so much you can do with it. Another quote, I was a philosophy major here at Notre Dame, and David Hume was my favorite philosopher, and he said, "A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence." And I really love this quote, and it sort of guides how I think about things in the real world. So this is sort of the spectrum of biomedical research. We have basic scientific research, which really focuses on understanding fundamental mechanisms of human disease, usually involving animal models or cell lines, all the way to clinical research like clinical trials directly involving patients, or actually using data from the medical record to find associations between clinical variables and outcomes. And in the middle, you have this sort of translational research area, which has sort of emerged as a main area of research in the last maybe 15 years, I'd say, which takes mechanisms that we find in basic research and tries to apply them to patients directly, or takes clinical phenomena that we see in the clinic and actually try to understand the fundamental mechanisms behind it. So I've had the privilege of being able to sort of engage in all of these areas and sort of find what I like. So for basic research, we're actually working at MGH right now using a non-human primate model, which is essentially monkeys, to study the effects of stem cell transplantation on the lungs. For translational research, when I was at the University of Chicago, we identified a unique autoantibody that we think portends poor prognosis for patients who have a deadly disease called lupus. And for clinical research, I'm working with a group at MIT where we just received a grant to use machine learning to try to identify biases in organ allocation for patients who are receiving lung transplantation. But today, I'm here to really talk to you about something called Ecmo. So Ecmo is basically a process that bypasses the lungs when the lungs aren't working. And so, as a lot of you know, during the pandemic, we had to place patients on ventilators, and so that was because their lungs essentially were not oxygenating their blood. So what we do is we place a cannula, usually in the femoral vein on the right there, and then another cannula in the internal jugular vein on the right. We remove blood from the body, we put it through a machine that oxygenates the blood, removes the carbon dioxide, and then put it back into the body, essentially bypassing the lungs. This is the machine. This is what it looks like here on the right, and then at the bottom, that's actually what the membrane looks like when it's full of blood. And so what this machine does is it actually buys the patient time for their lungs to heal. It does not replace the lungs entirely because you can't leave the hospital on an Ecmo machine. So basically what we're trying to do is get in early, turn the ventilator settings down on the ventilator so that the lungs aren't sort of being pushed full of air and being injured the entire time, and let the lungs heal. So this was a case that was published in the New York Times early on in the pandemic. This is my group over at Mass General, and we had this patient named Jim Bello, who was a 49-year-old lawyer who was actually on a hike when he spiked a fever, and 6 days later he was on the ventilator. At the top right-hand corner, you see what normal lungs look like. That's a normal chest X-ray. The air is supposed to be in the lungs, and when lungs are full of air, it appears black on a chest X-ray, and this is what Mr. Bello's lungs look like at the bottom, just full of water and collapsed. It's in medicine what we call a whiteout. But this is actually Mr. Bello leaving the ICU, and this is a clip taken from that Times article. He spent 18 days on Ecmo, but after that, we removed the cannula, and after 32 days on the ventilator, he actually came off and was able to be wheeled out of the hospital himself. And I promise on there, that's me with the red arrow. And so at Mass General, we were not only the most active Ecmo center, and not only during the pandemic, but sort of in general, not in Boston, but we were also the most active Ecmo center in New England. And so from this experience, we actually put out a couple publications just sort of detailing our experiences there. One here on the right is where we found an association with these elevated inflammatory markers and intracranial hemorrhage or brain bleeds in patients with Ecmo. And then I wrote another sort of editorial elaborating on that will come out in an issue of Critical Care Medicine next month. On the left, there's this FAST literature assessment and review, which is a source of educational materials that we put together for physicians all across the country, all across the world, who were having to deal with COVID patients, but maybe weren't the most familiar with how to manage ventilators, how to manage critically ill patients, and how to manage Ecmo. So we did this as well. So I just want to end on another quote, and this is from Father Hesburgh, which I thought was appropriate for today, which is, "Whatever you value, be committed to it and let nothing distract you from this goal. The uncommitted life, like Plato's unexamined life, is not worth living." And so just getting back to my 2 points, if you're passionate about something, you should let that drive you. And so for the students and young alumni who may be watching this, really find what you're passionate about and let it guide you and just follow that feeling. And the other thing is, for those who are going into medicine, I really do encourage you to consider a career in research. It's incredibly rewarding. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to the Alumni Association to get a hold of me. Happy to talk about it. Thank you.